Hello, this is the Blast Report podcast on all things blasting. My name is 𝗧𝗵𝗲 with New Wave Consulting, and I want to thank all the drill and blast teams along with those supporting them who are out there on the pattern. The production team at Blast Think and I would like to welcome you to today's episode of the Blast Report podcast. This episode of the Blast Report podcast is brought to you by the Best in the West Conference. The Best in the West Conference regularly hosts over 300 participants to bring mining companies, drill and blast suppliers, and government agencies together to focus on safety, education, and innovation. It is with great pleasure to share this sponsorship opportunity as a thank you to Mr. Walt Partridge from the organizers of the Best in the West. In the last 20 years, they have distributed over $150,000 in scholarships to students from 7 states. As the auctioneer, Walt Partridge has been a crucial part in raising these funds, and we want to take this opportunity to thank you, Walt, not only for your time, but also all of the great laughs. We hope our listeners enjoyed this episode and plan to see you on April 22nd, 2026 at the 37th Annual Best in the West Conference. Well, thank you very much, Walt Partridge. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you.
I appreciate you coming on to the Blast Report podcast. I know it's kind of last minute, and I reached out to you just to see what's going on, but your name was brought up, and I've been to some of your auctions before, and I was told that there's a lot more history than you just being part of the auctions, and wanted to dive into that a little bit.
Sure.
Can you tell our listeners here what was your first experience in the explosive industry, and how did you get into it?
In 1965, I moved to Alaska to selling logging equipment in 𝗕𝗏𝗀𝗃, Alaska. And I did that for about 5 years. DuPont was selling a lot of explosives into the timber industry for road building and construction. And they had a salesman up there and a technical guy. And he didn't want to live in Alaska. And DuPont was looking for someone to live in. And I lived there. So they contacted me and asked if I'd like to go to work for them. At the time, a couple of things happened, and it worked for me to at least sit down and have an interview with them. And I did. And I thought, well, I might try it for a year or so just to see how it goes. And so I did. I went to work for DuPont in 1970, and then I stayed in Alaska for 5 years. The first thing I did, I didn't know anything about explosives, and so they sent a fellow up to train me by the name of Al Everett. Al was an old blaster and a mining engineer, nice guy. And what I did was I went to every logging camp. This is before Al came up. I went to every logging camp, and I went to the camp manager, and I asked him if I could work on the blasting crew for a week. So I went to all the major logging logging camps, and I worked on the blasting crew for a week. And so all my customers thought that they taught me the explosives.
Mm-hmm.
And then Al Everett came up. And then, of course, I went to several DuPont schools over the years. Some of them were pretty intense, and over time, I became, pretty proficient in the explosives business. And I stayed in Alaska about 5 years with DuPont, and then around 1975 or so, I decided I'd like to get out of Alaska and do something else.
Have a little bit.
Yeah. And so I worked in the construction industry on a product called 𝗧𝗵𝗲, which was a fabric that you laid down for road building, and then you put rock on top of it, and it didn't allow the mud to come up and contaminate the rock.
Oh, okay.
So you could use less rock in road building. And we're very successful in Alaska, because in Alaska when we blasted there, we didn't use crushers, so we tried to crush it with explosives in the pit.
Mm.
And then they use that as road.
Okay.
And you were hoping that they got enough fines out of it that you'd have some topping out of it.
What was it like, going to each of these logging camps and having a different person teach you
their method,
Yeah. Well,
and every single method was a little different, or sometimes
that's
greatly
right.
different.
That's right. In those days, some were blasting with 𝗵𝗲, some were cap and fuse, some were electric, electric caps, and so they were all a little different. But in a lot of ways, they were still the same because they were all blasting small quarries for road building. So
Okay.
from that standpoint, it was similar, but each superintendent had a different way of going about it, and it was interesting to work with them. I remember after I'd been in the business for some time, I went out to, there was one camp that was still using cap and fuse and 𝗵𝗲, and the manager asked me to come out and teach them how to do some delays with 𝗵𝗲. So I said, okay, I would do that. And I went out there, and we were just trying to do some very basic echelon blasting with 𝗵𝗲, which they hadn't done, and so anyway, we had it all set up. We were laying the 𝗵𝗲 out to go, and 𝗵𝗲 shoots about 21,000 feet per second. Cap and fuse is usually a foot a minute or something like that, and so when we're laying the 𝗵𝗲 out, and this fellow says to me, "How fast does this shoot?" I said, "About 21,000 feet per." Oh, he says, "We're gonna have to run like hell when we set this up." It was funny. It was funny. And then, but there was a lot of other blasting projects in Alaska that I got involved with. When they put the pipeline in, I was in Alaska, and if you remember, they started to do the pipeline, and then it was stopped for environmental reasons. But when they stopped it for environmental reasons, DuPont had explosives supplies all up and down the route the pipeline was going to take, and so they were sitting in there in burned magazines, so to speak, and but loose on pallets. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, so they got a special permit to do all of that. It was up and down. They stopped the pipeline for, I think, maybe 6 months, maybe a year and a half. I can't remember the exact time. Anyway,
Long enough.
that they were worried about the dynamite, because it was always dynamite in those days. They weren't worried about the dynamite leaking and whether it would be safe. So I went up there and inspected it all, and decided there was a lot of it that wasn't stable, and so they ended up destroying all the tons and tons and tons of dynamite that was up there, and we shipped up new explosives when they started the pipeline again.
Wow.
So there was the pipeline going on, there was mining going on in Alaska. There was a lot of, because places like 𝗕𝗏𝗀, you're either on the water or there's rock, and so there was a lot of blasting for home sites and construction sites and different, any kind of, you blasted something out of the rock and made a pad for it out on the water to create a town. That's what happened.
Was Red Dog, the zinc mine up there, was that a start?
That came in later.
Came in later.
Yeah. There was a mine outside. There was a mine outside of Juneau that was a underground mine that DuPont had supplied explosives for many years before I was there, and then it got going again after I left, so I wasn't involved in it. Yeah.
So when you destroyed all that dynamite, did you just go to each interval of those pallets and detonate those pallets?
No,
Or
they burn it all.
You burn it all.
Yeah,
Okay.
they burn it all. They sped it all out and burn it. I wasn't there. I told them what they needed to do, and they spread it all out, and they burn it, put diesel on it, in the pallets, and it burn it all out. Yeah.
6 months later, a whole new truck shipment there.
Yeah, and all came up by rail.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, because I came up, you had to come. In those days, DuPont had a manufacturing plant in DuPont, Washington, on Puget Sound. So you could come right up to the plant with barges, load the explosives on the barges, take them up to Alaska, transfer them onto rail cars, and then take them up to Fairbanks and up that way, and that way. I remember talking about different things that happened, but I remember, I was telling this story last night, but I remember doing some controlled blasting in 𝗕𝗏𝗀. There was a large rock, and 𝗕𝗏𝗀 is on the water, and a lot of the homes are on on stilts, piling. And so I was doing some pre-shear work there, and we set it all up, set it off. The rock took off, went across the road, knocked the pilings out from underneath the house, and the house fell down. was not my best day.
No.
Was not my best day. Luckily, it didn't do a lot of damage to the house. We were able to pull it back up again and set it in, and it was all right. But it was.
You didn't make a friend that
Yeah,
day.
it wasn't. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
What are some other stories that you have from those logging days or from the slope?
Well, the thing that's different today, when I was up there, they were all remote camps. And as a salesman, I would get up in the morning. I lived in Ketchikan. I would get up in the morning, go down and charter an airplane or get a seat on a charter. And I would start flying out to all whatever camps I was going to that. And that's how you got around. You went from camp to camp by plane. I had a friend of mine by the name of Dave. Can't think of Dave's last name at the moment, but Dave worked for Union Oil, and we would share a charter because he was selling oil, I'm selling explosives. We weren't competitive, and we would charter a plane, and we would make, maybe we'd sit 3 or 4 or 5 camps in a day, and we'd go out, have breakfast at one camp. He would talk to the manager. I would do whatever we needed to do. Then we'd go to the next one, and we'd go to the next one. And we did that. We did that for a long time, and it saved both our companies a lot of money.
Sure did.
Yeah.
What was it? How much was it to charter a plane like that?
Well, it was chartered on 185s. I can't remember the time. It seemed like it was, in those days, it was about $185, $200 an hour, something like that. And
Wow.
so you go out, and the plane didn't always stay with you. It did when Dave and I were traveling together, but other times you'd fly out to a camp, and then they drop you off, and you'd stay there and visit, and so on and so forth. And you'd catch another plane going back in, because the float plane, these are all float planes. They were flying all the time, bringing people in and out, supplies going in and out, so on and so forth. And so it was, you'd just wave a plane down, or you'd get on the radio, see if a plane was in the area. They'd come in, stop in, and pick you up, take you to the next camp, or take you back home, whatever it happens to be. One time before I went into the explosives industry, to give you an example of what happened, I was selling logging equipment, and 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and 𝗕𝗹𝘀𝗃 drill. And I made a trip with the 𝗧𝗵𝗲, who was the manufacturing director for 𝗕𝗃𝗃. And there was a new operation going in over on an island called 𝗵𝗲, which was on an Indian reservation. We decided we would go over and try to catch Ed Head was his name, and see if we could sell him a drill. So we did. And to get there, we flew from Ketchikan to 𝗵𝗲, which was on Indian reservation. And we found out we borrowed, the guy on the back gave us a ride on a pickup out to where Ed's trailer was. And we went out there in the pickup, and Ed wasn't there. We found out that Ed was over on the site. You could see it was on a point outside of 𝗵𝗲. So how do you get there? Well, he said, if you go down to the dock, you can probably catch one of the trawlers that are going out. He'll give you a ride over. So we went down to the dock, and sure enough, one of the trawlers was going out, was getting ready to go fishing, a commercial trawler, and so I asked him if he'd give us a ride, and he said he would, and we went over there. And as we're going over there, he said, they're putting in a log dump, and there was a lot of rock out in front. He said, I don't know how close I can get to the beach to let you off, so I'm just going to ease up. And as soon as you hear that the boat hit the rock, jump off, but I'll get you close enough. So I'm standing there with my little briefcase ready to go. The boat scrapes the rock, and I jump, and I don't make it. I miss. I end up about 4 feet of water. The boat goes right past me.
Oh no!
Goes right past me, and 𝗧𝗵𝗲 steps off onto the rock, doesn't get wet at all. And I'm standing over anyway, and it's freezing cold. It's wintertime. So luckily, Ed had a big fire going, burning up a bunch of waste. So we went up there and stood by the waste, and it was so cold. My front of my jeans would be the steam would be coming off, and the backside would be frozen. And we stood there for a while, and nobody's around. And pretty soon we heard this clunk, 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 and down the hill comes a head on a, I think it was D6, D8, I don't remember now, and down the hill on the tractor. And he sees us, and he said, "What the hell are you guys doing here?" So we said, "Well, we're here." And introduced ourselves and said, we're
You had
selling.
never even met him before.
No. And we introduced ourselves, and we said, "Hey, we, talked about 𝗧𝗵𝗲 or Chicago pneumatic drills." He said, "I wouldn't have any of those on the claim." And he turned around and went up the hill. So we're standing. So what we did was, it was a plane flying up. We flagged the plane. He came down, landed. We got on the plane. We went back home. Those kinds of things.
All
Those
that
are the
just
kinds
for
of things. Yeah.
just for him to turn around and go back.
Yeah, that's right. So you think about it, we flew, we went on a boat, we went on a car, we walked, all those kinds of things to make a sales call.
Got soaking
and then
wet.
they didn't want it.
And then he didn't even, then he just turns around and slowly
Exactly.
drives back
So
away.
it goes back up the hill.
Clink, 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 clink. I bet that's the slowest you've ever seen a dozer.
That is exactly right. But those that's the way it was up there. That's how you got around. That's how you made calls. Other times, I would go out and I would stay in the camp maybe for 2 or 3 days and work on the crew and loading holes and different things, and go back in again.
So you'd be loading holes, helping them out, and they were already using your powder, or they were somebody else's powder?
They were already using it, and the thing that happened was that DuPont had most of the business when I went up there.
You guys had a boat, didn't you?
Yeah, we had 2 boats. We had a boat that delivered explosives called the MV DuPont, and another one called the MV Otter, and they delivered explosives around up there.
I've heard of the Otter.
Yeah, and in those days, there wasn't any competition at that time, but there was competition coming. That's why they wanted somebody local when I got there. So when I went around to all the camps and had them teach me how to do it, they all thought that they had taught me the explosives business. So when a competitor would come in, they'd say, "No, we're doing business with Walt. We taught him the explosives business." And so for the time that I was there, Austin came. They took a run at us. ICI took a run at us out of Canada and different things. I never lost any account that I lost was an account that I didn't call on because they weren't paying us. And I let the competition have that. And finally, they all left.
They realized that they're not getting paid either.
That's right. That's right.
Damn.
Yeah.
So what was it like having the MV Otter and the MV DuPont? Well, for most of us in this industry, you get a nice load when you need it, when you call it, and you got a bulk truck there every day. So what was some of the horror stories or the good stories of having your product delivered by boat?
It just took a lot of logistics effort. And so I would go out to the camps and find out what they needed in the way of explosives ahead of time, several weeks ahead. And we would put the orders together, and then I would call that into the plant. We'd make the product. It would come up by barge, and it would come up either by barge, rail, or it would come up. The MV Otter would go down and pick it up in Puget Sound, bring it up. And then because the business got to be so the volume of the business got to be so large, we ended up putting a floating magazine off on an island in Alaska. And so we would bring the explosives up. The MV Otter during the wintertime would load that floating magazine up. And then in the summertime when we were busy, it didn't have to go all the way down to Puget Sound to get there. It would just pick up there. So he would pick up explosives. It was all on pallets, and we'd get to a camp. They'd swing the pallets off onto a flatbed or the back of a dump truck or something like that, and it would go up the hill, and they would unload it and put it in a magazine. And that went on that way for years and years. Now there was no other way to get there.
Yeah.
It had to come in by water.
Had to come in by water. And you had the boats, so any business that tried to come in and get that,
They had to have a boat.
they had to have a boat.
Yeah, and when it wasn't ICI, it was when the Canadians tried to do it. They had a Canadian vessel that came up, and they were delivering boats. But under the Jones Act, you can't make multiple stops without on a foreign bottom vessel. It has to be an American bottom vessel or a U.S. bottom. So they couldn't go in and make multiple stops at camp. They could come from Canada, make one stop, and then go back to Canada. They couldn't go to camp. And so when they were trying to do that, then I went to the customs people and I said, you really need to enforce the regulation on the Jones Act, which they did, and then they couldn't deliver. They could deliver to one customer.
Yeah.
But it wasn't economically feasible to do that. Yeah. So so I was in Alaska for 5 years, and
so most of the time in those, they were breaking the rock for road rock.
Right.
Were they using the product and building the roads as well, or was that mainly just done?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, they
were building road.
There were
cuts
times
too.
when you had a rock, when you had some cut,
Mm-hmm.
and they would use the explosives there. A lot of explosives was used for stumping to get those big spruce stumps out of the way. So there was a lot of explosives used there. But it was used in various ways. But most of it was used for quarrying aggregate for road building. But you'd have some rock cuts from time to time too.
Any other interesting stories you have from those days in those camps?
Well, a lot of times. Well, yeah. I mean, during the when they would shut down in the summertime over 4th of July and one thing, I would go out and some of those camps, some of the smaller operations want to keep going and get ahead of the road building because they had to stay. The roads had to stay ahead of the logging.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would go out and I would operate the cookhouse while the rest of the crew was in town, so I'd cook for the blasting crew.
Really?
While they were there. Yeah. So we did that. We did that a lot. I think Alaska was a fun place to be because the people were really nice.
Sounds like the job was always changing too, and you were never just doing one role.
Oh, that's
You're
right.
out here cooking and
That's right.
managing boats and floating magazines, different
right.
powder.
Yeah, I've got a bad back today from just taking boxes of 50-pound box of powder up the hill. And it was crazy to do that, but that's what we did. We put them on our shoulders and we went up the hill to load the hole. That's the only way you could get them.
Yeah. Did you is it one of those things where, I mean, you still keep in contact with any of those guys?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I started doing auctions for them up there some years ago, and I still go up to the Alaska Forest Products convention and do a benefit auction for them once a year. And so, but the interesting thing is, probably only 2 or 3 people are around that were there when I was there.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them have passed on.
And any stories you have from them?
Not really. I mean, I can't think of anything at the moment. I could probably a little bit, but no, there were a lot of characters, and there's probably some stories, but I can't really.
Come on, I want to hear them. This is our podcast. You can share whatever story you got. No worries.
There was a couple of funny guys up there. One guy was the name of 𝗵𝗲 𝗕𝗹𝘀𝗁, and another guy by the name of Hildry, and they were characters all the time. And in Sitka, there's a distinct volcano just outside of town, and those 2 guys got together and they put a whole bunch of tires, flew them in by helicopter into the center of this extinct volcano, and on the 4th of July they lit it, and the smoke started boiling out of the volcano, and everybody thought the volcano was active and going to get going. So that was good. But
they managed to fly in these tires.
Yeah, they flew them
months in advance or something.
Yeah, over a period of time, because there were helicopters were flying around all the time. People didn't pay any attention, and so they would just sneak them. They would come around the backside with these tires hanging on, and they loaded up. I don't remember how many, but enough that when they set it off, there was a big plume of black smoke that coming out of there for quite a while. And that story is that's an ancient story in Sitka for sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
The
right.
time the whole town thought that the
Yeah,
volcano was alive again.
exactly, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Blast Report podcast. I want to thank the team at Blast Think for producing this show, and please follow along for more episodes in the future, and share this podcast with your colleagues so we can continue to honor our industry and the people in it. Be safe and have a blast.